In a crowded martial arts gym, where egos clashed as often as fists, a black belt's careless joke about sparring with a black woman newcomer sparked whispers and smirks, until her response left the entire room frozen, mouths agape, and the mat forever changed. The gym was alive with a familiar hum of effort, the rhythmic thuds of gloves hitting pads, the sharp exhales of fighters drilling their techniques, and the occasional shout of encouragement from a coach. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the advanced class at Rising Dragon Martial Arts Academy was in full swing. The room was packed with practitioners of all levels, from white belts nervously tying their OBs to seasoned black belts who moved with the confidence of years spent mastering their craft. Among them was Marcus, a third-degree black belt known for his quick jabs, quicker wit, and a reputation for never shying away from a challenge, or a chance to make the room laugh. Marcus was in the middle of the mat, his GI crisp and his stance loose, as he bantered with a group of students during a break. His voice carried over the gym's ambient noise, drawing attention as it often did. "Yo, anybody think they can take me today?" he called out, grinning, his eyes scanning the room for a reaction. The younger students chuckled, used to his bravado. Marcus was good, really good, and he knew it. His record in local tournaments was near flawless, and his charisma made him a favorite among the gym's regulars. But his humor could sometimes cross lines, especially when he got caught up in the moment. That's when his gaze landed on Aisha, a newcomer who'd been attending classes for only a few weeks. She was standing near the edge of the mat, stretching quietly, her focus inward as she prepared for the sparring session. Aisha was tall, with an athletic build that suggested she'd spent time training somewhere before stepping into Rising Dragon. Her dark skin glistened slightly under the gym's fluorescent lights, and her braided hair was pulled back tightly, ready for action. She hadn't spoken much since joining, but her quiet intensity had already caught the attention of a few instructors. Marcus, however, hadn't sparred with her yet, and today, for whatever reason, he decided to make her the target of his next quip. "Hey, Aisha, right?" Marcus said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "You ever think about stepping up to the big leagues? Or you just here to watch us pros do our thing?" The gym rippled with laughter, some genuine, some nervous. Marcus paused for effect, then added, "I mean, I'd go easy on you. Wouldn't want to mess up those braids or anything." He punctuated the line with a playful jab at the air, expecting more laughs. A few chuckles followed, but they were quieter now, tinged with unease. The room's energy shifted slightly, as if everyone sensed the line had been crossed, even if they couldn't quite articulate why. Aisha didn't flinch. She stopped stretching, stood up straight, and turned to face Marcus. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes locked on his. The gym seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her reaction. Most newcomers would have brushed it off, laughed nervously, or stayed silent to avoid escalating things with a black belt. But Aisha wasn't most newcomers. She tilted her head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, and said, "You sure you want to test that theory, Marcus? Because I'm ready to spar. Right now." The words landed like a perfectly timed counterpunch. The gym went silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Marcus blinked, caught off guard, his grin faltering for a split second before he recovered. "Oh, we got a live one," he said, trying to keep the tone light. "All right, let's see what you got. Coach, you cool with this?" He glanced at Coach Daniels, a grizzled veteran who'd seen every kind of gym drama unfold over his 20 years of teaching. Daniels raised an eyebrow, looked between Marcus and Aisha, and nodded. "Gear up," he said simply, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp with interest. The other students began to gather around the mat, sensing something unusual was about to happen. Marcus was a known quantity, fast, strong, and technically precise. Aisha, on the other hand, was a mystery. She'd been consistent in classes, but she hadn't showcased her full skill set yet. Some whispered that she'd trained in another style before coming to Rising Dragon, maybe boxing or Muay Thai, but no one knew for sure. What they did know was that Marcus had just called her out in front of everyone, and she'd answered without hesitation. As Aisha slipped on her gloves and adjusted her headgear, she moved with a calm that was almost unsettling. There was no bravado, no posturing, just a quiet focus that made the hairs on the back of some students' necks stand up. Marcus, meanwhile, kept up his usual chatter, joking with his buddies as he strapped on his gear. "Gotta make this quick," he said, loud enough for Aisha to hear. "Got a date later." More laughter, but it was thinner now, the crowd sensing the undercurrent of tension. The sparring session began with Coach Daniels giving the usual rundown. 3 2-minute rounds, light contact, no dirty shots. "Keep it clean, keep it sharp," he said, his eyes lingering on Marcus for a moment longer than necessary. The bell rang, and the two stepped into the center of the mat. Marcus moved first, circling Aisha with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He threw a quick jab to test her, expecting her to flinch or back away. He didn't. Instead, she slipped the jab with a subtle shift of her head, her feet gliding across the mat with a smoothness that made a few onlookers lean forward. Marcus frowned slightly, then pressed forward, throwing a combination: jab, cross, hook. Aisha parried the jab, blocked the cross, and stepped out of range of the hook, her movements economical and precise. The crowd murmured. Marcus wasn't landing anything clean, and Aisha hadn't even thrown a punch yet. "Come on, don't run from me," Marcus said, his tone still playful but with a hint of irritation. He doubled down, feinting a low kick before snapping a high one toward Aisha's head. It was a move he'd used to catch plenty of opponents off guard. But Aisha saw it coming. She leaned back just enough for the kick to whistle past her, then stepped forward in one fluid motion, closing the distance. Before Marcus could reset, she fired off a crisp jab that caught him square on the nose. It wasn't hard enough to hurt, but it was enough to make his eyes water and his head snap back. The gym erupted in gasps and low whistles. Marcus shook it off, laughing, but his face flushed slightly. All right, you got one," he said, circling again. "Let's see if you can do it again." He came in harder this time, throwing a flurry of punches, each one faster than the last. Aisha didn't try to match his speed. Instead, she moved with a kind of effortless grace, slipping and weaving, her body always just out of reach. When Marcus overcommit to a right cross, she countered with a sharp left hook to his ribs, followed by another jab to his chin. Both shots landed clean, and this time the crowd's reaction was louder. Some cheers, some shocked exclamations. Marcus stepped back, his grin gone now. He was still in control, but the ease he'd started with was fading. Aisha, meanwhile, looked like she was just warming up. Her breathing was steady, her eyes locked on Marcus, reading every twitch of his shoulders, every shift of his weight. Coach Daniels called the end of the first round, and the two returned to their corners. Marcus's buddies crowded around him, offering advice and slapping his shoulders, but his focus was elsewhere, his jaw tight as he stared across the mat at Aisha. She, on the other hand, stood alone, taking a sip of water and rolling her shoulders. A younger student, a white belt named Jamal, approached her hesitantly. "Yo, that was crazy," he whispered. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" Aisha just smiled and said, "Around." Jamal didn't press further, but he rejoined the crowd with a look of awe. The second round began, and Marcus came out aggressive. He wasn't joking anymore. His punches were heavier, his kicks sharper, each one carrying the weight of his bruised ego. Aisha met him head-on, but not recklessly. She absorbed his pressure, redirecting his energy with subtle angles and counters. When he threw a spinning back kick, she stepped inside its arc and landed a quick uppercut that rocked him back on his heels. The crowd was on its feet now, some shouting encouragement, others just staring, unable to believe what they were seeing. Marcus was good, everyone knew that, but Aisha was something else. Her technique was flawless, but it was her composure that stood out. She didn't gloat, didn't taunt, didn't even seem fazed by the fact that she was outclassing a black belt in front of the entire gym. She fought like someone who'd been in tougher situations than this. Someone who knew exactly what she was capable of and didn't need to prove it to anyone but herself. By the third round, Marcus was visibly frustrated. His movements were still sharp, but they were less controlled, driven more by emotion than strategy. Aisha, by contrast, was a picture of calm. She didn't chase him or try to showboat. She just kept picking him apart, landing clean shots whenever he left an opening. When the final bell rang, the score wasn't even close. Aisha had dominated every round, not through brute force but through precision, timing, and an almost uncanny ability to read her opponent. The gym was buzzing as the two bowed to each other. Marcus managed a tight smile, but his eyes told a different story. He was rattled, not just by the loss, but by the way it had happened. Aisha, for her part, simply nodded and began removing her gear. Her expression as calm as it had been before the spar. Coach Daniels stepped onto the mat. His face unreadable but his voice carrying a note of respect. "Good work, both of you," he said, though his gaze lingered on Aisha. Class dismissed. The students dispersed, but the energy in the room lingered. People were talking in hushed tones, replaying the fight in their heads, trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. Marcus's friends tried to cheer him up, but he brushed them off, heading to the locker room without a word. Aisha, meanwhile, stayed behind to help stack the mats, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Over the next few days, the gym was abuzz with talk of the spar. Some speculated about Aisha's background, wondering if she'd competed professionally or trained under some legendary coach. Others focused on Marcus, debating whether his loss was a fluke or a sign that he'd underestimated his opponent. A few of the younger students started approaching Aisha for tips, drawn to her quiet confidence and undeniable skill. Marcus, to his credit, didn't hold a grudge, at least not openly. The next week, he approached Aisha during a break and offered a handshake. "You got me good," he said, his tone sincere but still carrying a trace of wounded pride. "Where'd you train before this?" Aisha just smiled and said, "Here and there. You're not bad yourself." It wasn't the answer he was looking for, but it was all she gave. As weeks turned into months, Aisha became a fixture at Rising Dragon. She never bragged about the spar, never brought it up unless asked, but the story took on a life of its own. It became a kind of gym legend, a reminder that skill and heart could come from anywhere, and that a single moment on the mat could change how people saw you, and how you saw yourself. Marcus, for his part, dialed back the trash talk, at least for a while. And Aisha, she just kept showing up, training hard and proving.